Here's how I put together my own Marel Rivals sort of Star-Lord figure using 2 MCU Star-Lords and the Civil Warrior, as well as a custom head sculpt from Daisho Creations 3D, same as the blade that I made, and a leather jacket from I think it was either AliExpress or Amazon. My first step is to boil the figures to break them apart. I specifically want the lower legs off the Civil Warrior to put onto the Guardians of the Galaxy 3 Star-Lord. This is my first time trying to remove pegs, so I boiled them up, had some needle nose pliers. It takes quite a bit of effort to push them through. More so on the Civil Warrior, the Guardians of the Galaxy Star-Lord, those things came off super easy, as you can see there. Then just kind of testing them to see how I feel like they look, you know, kind of getting what I want. I decide here that I'm definitely going to leave those red ball pegs as they are, and then I move on to the belt. I'm removing the Civil Warrior's belt, which is like a real chunky piece, but with a slight slit just pulls straight off. Any damage to the back of the belt will be covered by the coat anyway, so I'm clipping off the excess here because they like fit between the torso and legs. Then we move on to sanding and prepping the areas that I'm wanting to like paint and colour later. I take quite a bit of extra time on this sort of like silvery, like marbly plastics. I feel like it won't paint very well. All you really need to do is lightly scuff stuff just to kind of make sure that the like sort of production oils are removed and the grittier surface is better for the paint to take to. It's always a good idea to make sure you hit every single area that you want to paint, and especially the joints where paint rub's going to be. It doesn't matter so much on this figure because I'm going to be dyeing a lot of it, and that prevents there's no paint rub when you dye an area, but it's still good to do. Here I'm just heating up the feet to remove those ball pegs because like I said, I don't want to dye them. And then I'm pulling off all the pieces from the Love and Thunder Peter quill because like the jacket here is actually what inspired me in the first place to do this. He's got so many little bits and bobs and like the shoulder pads, the arm pieces, and I want to use as much of those as I can get, as well as the guns from this figure. The sort of weird bib that he has on is super easy to just pull apart. It was barely heated, just pulls straight off. Then I'm heating up the arms and stuff to remove those shoulder pads that I talked about. Everything's slightly glued in, like by tabs, but with a little bit of heat and a little bit of cutting, anything that's on there will come straight off. As seen here, it's got like multiple tabs, so I get tripped up on it a little bit. I ended up cutting these off screen because they took way more effort than I expected. And then the sort of big blue part of this coat. Originally I was going to do like a fabric strip, but I actually preferred how it looked just taking the piece straight off this like rubber coat. When you heat up this sort of soft rubbery plastic that Marvel Legends use for a lot of their like coats and stuff, it becomes like butter to cut. The initial moments after heating it up, it's insane how easily a knife glides through it, so you can get very smooth, very precise cuts without very much effort. And here you can see the final piece, and then a test fit of everything, just making sure it all kind of looks how I want it to look in my head before we go dive into sort of dyeing and colouring. Next up, I've got some warm water here to kind of help with like mitigating all the amount of plastic that's going to be going everywhere and washing it off as I'm going. I'm dremeling holes into either side of the legs here because I'm wanting to put magnets in and magnets into the gun so it acts as like a holster, kind of like how he has those glowing bits on his thighs in the game that these guns sort of like teleport into. You can see me sort of like test fitting the magnet there. Wear a mask, you don't want plastic in you. And now we move on to dyeing, which is something I've never done before. Rit dye more is what you need. It's for synthetics like PU leather and stuff. If you leave it long enough, it can do plastic. This is set to just the number 1 on my stove, and I dunk the plastic in for an hour, occasionally stirring it, not trying to not let stuff touch the bottom of the pan for so long that it might melt.
1 hour later.
Fishing everything out here was a strange experience. You can see that the gun is very black. A lot of this comes back out once you've sort of washed it, dried it off, ran it under some like clean hot water for a while. A good amount of the dye comes out. What we also see here is me discovering that the dye takes very differently to the different limbs and joints. The main body's plastic is a very different type of plastic to the limbs, so the dye has taken in very different ways, whereas the limbs have gone basically exactly what I was hoping for, and the guns are near enough what I was hoping for. The torso, and you can see it in the back there, it's just a slightly darker version than what it was. It hasn't turned black at all. So I will have to resolve to prime the body black and paint that stuff back in, but that's fine. I didn't really expect it to fully work. And here I discovered that the neck joint hasn't actually dyed at all. I guess it was quite a tight fit. I did not sand it down enough. so the liquid didn't really get in, and a little bit around the joints as well, but those arm joints will be covered by the coat anyway, so it's all a bit of trial and error. Here it is after I've primed it all black. It's a couple of coats here. I did heavily sand around that abdomen crunch so that there wouldn't be paint rub. With it being quite a thin layer of primer anyway, it shouldn't actually rub away very much to begin with, and you can see here where I've dremeled in the magnet holes on the guns too. Now again, I'm just laying everything out to get a feel for how everything looks now we're this far in. And here's a view of the mix of dyeing and painting and a little bit of everything ready to go forward. So the next step here is I have some army paint of red. I got it in some multi-pack ages ago, and I'm painting in all of the red details that I want, around the belt buckle, the strap itself, yeah. And here's the main part of painting the knees. I maybe start with a little bit too thick of a layer to begin with. You know, you should water your paints down, use thin layers to get a nice even coat. Mine doesn't look super even in the end, you know, something to keep in mind going forward. But also, it kind of does have a bit of a streaky metal effect, so I don't mind. Then I kind of get distracted, and we move to gluing in the magnets for the holsters. Gluing down magnets is always a pain in the ass. Make sure you mark one half of the magnet so you know which way you want to point out and which way you point in, so you don't end up gluing them in the wrong way and having something completely unworkable. Something I definitely did do at least once while putting this together. And there's the test to show how the holsters work, and there's both of the holsters done. I was super happy with how these ended up coming out. Then we're back to painting, putting in the red lines on the torso and painting the emblem up more with army paint of gold this time. If I ever come back to this custom, actually, one of the things I want to do is try and make a custom emblem, maybe out of green stuff to make it bigger. Then we're on to the custom head sculpt by Disassembly Creations 3D. This is like the Marel Rivals look for Star-Lord. Primed it grey, didn't want it too dark. Put a little bit of white primer across the top to kind of bring the hair out a little bit. And yeah, I'm just steadily putting in the red here. You can see I already put a messy, like, kind of white layer down into the eyes, which I'll come back and refine as we go on. Then we come to painting the hair. Painting blonde I find to be a nightmare. You see a lot of tutorials online for how to get, like, really nice whitey blondes, really nice platinum blondes, but Star-Lord has a bit more of a strawberry, gingery, warm blonde. At least I think so, from, like, how he looks in the game and, like, you know, a little bit in the MCU. So my recipe for blonde is to put down a brown coat, then put down a very thin orange coat, and then build up a dry brush of your chosen yellow. Here I'm adding a bit of a very wet pink into the eyes to kind of sell that white to red kind of glow. Continue to put that pink in a lot of the other areas where there's red as well. Then I put a bit of a selective black wash around this sort of like muzzle area of his mask to try and bring out these sort of like ridge and line details that he's got going on. Then I bring out the Old Faithful, a Gundam fine point marker to kind of really get into them blacks. Then I add a little bit of gold to bring out the highlights because he has that in the game too. And that's the sort of final head there. So now that everything's dyed or painted, etc, I put it all onto this spraying stand so that I can hit it all with a sealant coat. Mostly using matte. I use a little bit of satin on a few areas. And then it's time to start putting everything together, getting the jacket on, taking all the parts like that, like crossover belt from that Love and Thunder Star-Lord to accessorize it, and then gluing on those sort of like arm pads also from the Love and Thunder. And then here we go, the final shot of this custom. Compared to my previous few customs, this guy took a lot more work, a lot more experimenting, but I think it all paid off. I think he looks fantastic. From this point on, it's just glamour shots. The main inspirations, as mentioned, were the sort of Love and Thunder look from the movies, as well as the Jovial Star skin from Marel Rivals, and I think I've got a nice, like, what I'd like between those two things. Comment any questions, let me know what you think of it, and like and subscribe. See you later.